Salam alaikum. Your Highness, Sheikh Sultan bin Ahmed Al Qasimi, Excellencies, distinguished guests, and fellow storytellers. Antarctica is arguably the most remote region on the planet. It may be the closest you can feel to visiting another world right here on planet Earth. So isolated is it that not even birds have flown over its deserted interior for at least 14 million years. I've had the great privilege of traveling deep into the continent to places that had never before mine seen a human footprint. One area was so remote that it even has a name that reflects it, the pole of inaccessibility. That inaccessibility, however, does not apply to some of humans' worst influences. We've grown accustomed to reports of plastics everywhere, from the inside of the digestive tracts of seabirds in the middle of the Pacific to the top of Mount Everest, even in distributed waters everywhere. Therefore, finding microplastics deep in the Antarctica biome barely feels like news. It clearly states that nowhere is left untouched. But the size of the particles at the South Pole is surprising, in the range of 11 micrometers. That's 0.0001 centimeters, about the size of a human cell. So I suppose it should not be surprising that plastics would be found in the human body, since it has also breached the human food web. We unknowingly eat plastic in our diet every day. In the oceans alone, by 2050, there will be more plastics than fish, and more plastics in fish. Even so, the cynic in us should take pause from the recent discovery that microplastics have passed the blood-brain barrier. They're inside the human brain and our neural pathways. We have concentrated plastic particle clusters in the brain, and this concentration increases each year, presently averaging about 7 grams, or about the weight of a plastic spoon. Now, plastics, of course, compete with a long list of humans' more egregious assaults on the natural world. In 2024, global temperatures passed the critical milestone of 1.5 degrees C, a limit set by the scientific community beyond which the world would tip into climate chaos. January was the warmest months on record, 2024 the warmest year. In fact, the last decade was the warmest in recorded history. And we have a pretty good idea of why. The 2015 Paris Accord warned of dire consequences for going beyond 1.5 C, a target it did not expect to reach before 2035. 10 years from now, we have just blown past 1.5 degrees C and may be near a tipping point. I'll give you an example of consequences. In the Arctic, changes in seasonal cycles wreak havoc on the biodiversity. Plants blossom sooner and feeding cycles peak earlier. The disruption to the migrating birds' travel and reproductive cycles lowers the survival rate of their chicks. Such changes affect the entire marine food web, while warming temperatures allow predators to move farther north, preying on bird eggs and chicks. Less birds fly back south, stressing the ecological dynamic of the more moderate latitudes, and thus goes the destabilization of entire ecosystems. As it is, the world has seen a 69% decline in vertebrate populations since the 1970s. And biologists say that we're presently at the onset of the planet's 6th mass extinction event. In short, to understand the disruption to one link of the natural chain is to recognize its impact on the entire chain of life around the planet, and what these statistics mean to the future of the human species. Climate change has no passport, and its impact is felt now everywhere. The world has lost 1% of inhabitable land since the 1970s. By the end of the century, this number will grow to 17%. Right now, biology is migrating from regions whose water stress simply does not support life. Plants, birds, animals, insects, and of course, people. By 2100, this will represent 1.5 billion people on the move, seeking economic prosperity and opportunities elsewhere, as they have, incidentally, for the last 2 million years. Nature does not recognize artificial borders. The new stress test will be to see how long these human borders hold. In Sharjah, climate change affects temperatures, water resources, coastal areas, and ecosystems. And you know this. You know this well because as extreme weather and water scarcity is driven by a climate that is warming at twice the rate of the rest of the world, just like in the Arctic. In truth, the sand and the ice deserts are kindred opposites of the same coin. And where the Inuit in the north face an existential threat, here in the Emirates, climate models project that some areas will regularly surpass the human survivability threshold by 2050. But it is the threat to the coastal areas that more directly links the deserts to the loss of ice with rising sea levels from melting ice sheets. Saltwater intrusion threatens freshwater resources and agriculture, just from even modest storms. Like a sandcastle slowly being erased by the rising tide, coastal regions are increasingly at risk of flooding and damage to infrastructure and food production. We see every day what the growing imbalance does to sociopolitics, from the US to Europe, Africa, and yes, in the Emirates as well. Growth is no friend of balance, and hunger no friend of peace. And unchecked growth in a finite environment, which is what we persist in doing, is tantamount to suicide. Your Highness, I applaud your visionary leadership within the Federation and Sharjah's considerable effort in developing sustainable technologies and your National Climate Change Plan 2017-2050, which outlines mitigation and adaptation across sectors. Sharjah is an example for the Emirates because addressing this challenge sooner remains much cheaper than delayed action later. Growth, yes, but sustainable growth. Otherwise, we are the cost. Against these bleak assessments, another war is being waged, and that is the war on truth. Partisan objectives are bending facts, scientific and otherwise, to fit their objectives. Of course, that certainly isn't new, but the proliferation of unregulated communication platforms gives outside advantage to opinion makers and interpretive opportunism. Given the stakes, that is, of growing significance, science is only accurate to the nearest probabilities, whereas opinions, well, opinions are always 100% accurate. From cherry-picking data, repackaging speculation as science, industry and corporate pseudoscience, and overstating uncertainties to delay action, the web has become as much a source of knowledge as it is of mistruths. The old saying, information is power, is under siege by a flood of misinformation that simply does away with the rigor of hypothesis-driven experimental science, what we called positivist science. And that is also true in the media. In a recent speech by Wall Street Journal Matt Murray, he criticized Elon Musk for equating social media dialogue with comprehensive reporting. It is not, any more than opinion platforms equate the scientific ones. Photographers have traditionally been the custodians of the truth. Trust your eye, the camera doesn't lie. Those were the adages of former times. But photography is facing an existential crisis of its own, a crisis of trust. In a world where image making is ubiquitous to communication, photographers have a moral responsibility to hold the line, the integrity line. Image makers are not necessarily truth tellers, but photographers. Photographers must pledge to be, and not fall prey to the temptation of manipulation which is so easily within reach. The sophistication of visual technology is advancing so fast that in a short matter of time, we will no longer believe anything that we see on the web, and certainly not images. Of course, we cannot and should not attempt to stop technology. That is not the point. But we must fight for the truth. Upholding ethical visual standards is the only hope that we have to avoid a Rubicon whose consequences are directly tied to the loss of individual freedoms and world stability as a whole. Photography's basic function remains to capture history and link it to emotions. But emotions without trust, that's a dangerous mix. It's called propaganda. More than ever, a photographer's primary responsibility must be to tell the truth, and imperatives should prioritize the research and development of technologies designed to uphold and verify the standards of authenticity in the visual medium. I look forward to the Content Authenticity Initiative speak on February 23rd, which will address that subject exactly. Now, plastics may have breached the blood-brain barrier, but our collective ethical red line must not be. Ours and future generations must work harder to be better active and everyday heroes, whether in our relationship with nature or our ethical standards against a moving technology. Now, I know that many feel that the train has left the station, that it is too late, that AI is taking over, and that there is not much we can do. But to quote Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it's not. Like music, photography remains the fastest way to reach into people's hearts, no matter the culture, no matter the style. As I'm fond to say, there are only two types of photography, good and bad. With its outside role in our societal understanding of big ideas, photographer must continue to amplify the profound emotional nexus that connects us. And for that, we must fight for authenticity to protect the delicate social fabric of trust. The foundational hallmark of good photography, along with generating emotion, is to hold the truth at any cost. So let's hold the line. It is possible. Everything is possible. The impossible just takes longer. Thank you very much. Shukrum.